All right, welcome to our very first TV Club bonus episode where we're going to be talking about season 1 of Y: The Last Man. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by two guests, the dynamic duo of Sara and Lilly, who co-host the Fiction Fans podcast, a show about two casual readers as they completely ignore their academic backgrounds and talk about the books they love. First up is Sara Carothers, who has 2 pugs and also secretly a cat. Right now she's reading Wheel of Time for some reason. I read book 1 and I'm kind of struggling to
I actually, we should update that because I did finish. I did finish Wheel of Time finally.
And I'm the one who wrote her bio, which is why it says for some reason.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thanks for joining us, Sara. How are you?
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you. And then next we have Lilly Ellison, who wrote a false bio for Sara. She has 2 cats and secretly 0 pugs. She does both reading and writing, and her most recent accomplishment was a collection of poetry about aforementioned cats. Happy to have you here, Lilly.
Great to be here. Hello.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking about season 1 of Y: The Last Man, which was aired on FX, and the 10-episode first season just finished up last week. So we're just going to dig into it and give our reactions, explore different aspects in terms of characters and themes and all kinds of stuff. But starting off, how were you both introduced to Y: The Last Man? Was it the comics or the new TV adaptation? So we'll start with you, Lilly.
My husband loves the 2 creators. Their names escape me right now, but they're sort of a powerhouse duo who have done quite a few different comic series. And so he recommended it to me, and he always has the best recommendations, so I knew it would be good.
I think it's cool. Vaughan and Pia Guerra.
Those are them, yes.
Yeah.
Pia Guerra, I think it's
Pia Guerra, yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually read more of Saga than I have of Y: The Last Man.
Nice.
Yeah, but I've read up until roughly episode 7 of the show in the comic books, but that was years ago, and I don't remember it very well.
Cool. And Sara, how about you?
So a couple of weeks before the show aired, Lilly said, you should watch this show and we should talk about it. And then you suggested that we come on to talk about it. So I watched the show. And that was my introduction.
Cool. And so, Lilly, you've had a little bit of experience with the comics. Excuse me. Sara, you're fresh into all of this. I had all of the omnibus editions of Y: The Last Man and just devoured it. Really, really loved the comic. Ended up leaving those because they were too heavy. I moved to Germany from Vancouver, and a friend of mine who was borrowing them at the time, I just said, like, have them. I'm good. So he said, thank you.
I was borrowing them from a roommate. So when I moved out, I was like, oh no, now I can't finish.
They're hefty. I think there's like 60 issues or something in the omnibus. There's 5 pretty thick books, but I really like the comics. The art style is amazing, and it was a very very representative of the times. I think the humor and the jokes that were being made were of the George Bush era in the United States. So there is a lot of sarcastic commentary about politics in the United States at that time. I'm kind of curious, like, how you two, Sara coming into it very fresh, Lilly having a little bit of experience, what were your initial impressions of the show? So we'll start with you, Sara.
So I can see why people like it. I didn't enjoy it, I'm afraid. Not that I think that it's a bad show. Like, I want to clarify that I think it's a good show, just not the show for me. I didn't enjoy the characters, and I'm not really a huge fan of this kind of post-apocalyptic sort of grim setting. So it just wasn't really for me.
And Lilly, what about you?
I loved
it. Good. We have some contrast. That's what we want.
We're gonna try not to interrupt each other too much.
Yeah, we do have a tendency to argue about things, and there might be a little bit of arguing here. We'll try to keep it to a minimum.
It's totally okay. Lilly, so you loved it. Tell me why.
Well, I think there is something very appealing about that disaster post-apocalyptic genre. One of the best things, in my opinion, is seeing how different people react in these stressful situations. And I think that's something that Why the Last Man does really, really well, especially considering the extra sort of layer of context over the top, which is the specific kind of event that created this situation. And it really delves into humanity in such an interesting way that I really enjoyed it. That's, I guess, the story overall. Um, it was just really cool watching the show and recognizing panels, right? That first episode was very striking and visceral.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm on the same page as you. I think I'm a little bit in the middle, coming from the comics, having a little bit more of like a devotee attitude. There were certain changes that were made for the show that I think didn't necessarily work on a fundamental level, but a lot of the comic, like you say, there's like specific panels, certain imagery, um, things that worked beautifully from the cinematic lens of a TV show, especially in the age of television that we're in right now. Um, Sarah, since you didn't love the show, I'm very curious. We're just gonna delve very quickly into the big event, the apocalyptic turning point for this series. Like, what kind of tone did that strike for you? And did that specific aspect work? Or
Yes, I think that worked. It was this odd combination for me of being really gory, and that is not so much my thing, but also fairly believable or as believable as something like this could be. Um, so I enjoyed that, and I like the concept. I can recognize that the concept has a lot of interesting applications, and you can do a lot with it. Um, but again, it's just not a genre that I tend to explore, and particularly when we're in a pandemic. Um,
yeah,
something that's kind of like pandemic potentially related is not really what I want to be watching right now.
it's too damn pessimistic.
That's funny. The
Well,
first
Lily,
thing I did was watch the movie Pandemic. I leaned in real hard.
it's like I really need to feel it. I need to know that I'm in it. Well, Lily, how about you explain briefly what the actual event was, and then get into your reactions as well.
Sure. As listeners may guess from the title, Why the Last Man, the apocalyptic event is that one day all males die. That's human males and animal males. Specifically Y chromosomes, which is something that the show does address, and I think in a very good way, but we'll talk about that later. And so it deals at the beginning with the immediate repercussions of that. You know, how many airline pilots are men? And so planes are dropping out of the sky. And then we sort of get the ripple effect of, well, how many politicians are men? Who's the president now? And how are we going to repair infrastructure? And on until everything just completely breaks down just due to the societal structures we had in place at the time.
And what was your reaction to this gory massacre of men?
Well, it's interesting to call it a massacre because it's not something external that we can see. We see the event happen, but I think it's depicted as they just start bleeding and then drop to the ground. So it's pretty sudden and pretty horrifying, especially for the people who are with their loved ones at the time. And I think that is probably what got me more than the blood. Blood doesn't bother me too much. But imagining like being with your young children and that moment is heartbreaking.
Yeah, that immediate association. You know, obviously I'm a man, so I would have died. I wouldn't know. So, but you know, my wife kind of popped into my head, thinking like how she would react if me and my son just suddenly were gone, but also in a very gory, devastating kind of way. So I think there's one character who she spent the night watching movies with her grandkids, basically, and she woke up the next morning to this horrifying scene around her of like everybody in the bed is dead except for her. So it was really powerful in a pretty terrifying way. And I think that got me hooked from the first episode. But continuing on in the second and third episode, things started to lag a little bit. And I think the really heavy tone that the first episode set was a bit downplayed by the pacing in the episodes that followed up. So did either of you notice that in terms of like the pacing of the show, how it lagged after this really, really heavy emotional opening?
I don't think that I've particularly noticed anything, but I was too busy being frustrated by how much the characters bothered me. So that kind of overshadowed anything else, I think.
Well, we'll get into the characters.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that just yet. I can wait.
Fucking tear them apart. But Lily, did you have any perception of the pacing, or did you notice anything in that regard?
So I watched it in sort of weird chunks. I think I watched the first 2 episodes and then the next couple episodes, and then I binged watched the last few. So I definitely got it at a different pace than, 1 episode per week. I think if I had had to wait several weeks in between some of those early episodes, it wouldn't have lost me. I was going to watch the show, but I think I would have enjoyed it less.
Yeah, it was a strange thing. I think it was like the setup was really, really tight. And then after that, obviously it's a character thing and how they represented the character storylines, but things kind of dragged a little bit for me personally. Sarah, we'll start with you. I just wanted to give listeners an idea of sort of the 3 main story arcs that we have and all the characters that are up in those narratives. So first we have Yorick, who is the last man, supposedly.
And Ampersand.
And Ampersand, his capuchin monkey.
Who's also a man.
Exactly. And so they're the last Y chromosomes on Earth. And in their storyline, there's Agent 355 and Dr. Allison Mann. And then another storyline which centers on the Pentagon and the political situation, is Jennifer Brown, who's Yorick's mother, Kimberly, who is the daughter of the former president, and then all of the people that are wrapped up within that Pentagon mess. And then finally there is Hero Brown, who's Yorick's sister, Sam, who is her transgender friend, sort of romantic interest in a little bit of a way. Maybe, yeah.
A little.
Romantic foil, not really. And then Nora, who used to work at the White House, but ends up finding herself wrapped up in Hero's storyline, and they get intertwined with a survivalist cult called the Amazons. So first off, we'll start off with Yorick and his supporting characters. Sarah, go for it.
Okay, so I will say I liked 355 and Dr. Mann. Once they were introduced, well, 355 is there from the beginning, right? And Dr. Mann comes in later. And once they were kind of like a team, I was much more invested in them because I thought that the 2 women brought a great dynamic. And I really enjoyed seeing how their relationship developed and deepened. But Yorick, I just found him to be kind of self-centered, unaware of the privilege that he has, not particularly thoughtful. I know Lily has the counterpoint that he's just doing his best and all of the characters are just doing their best. And I don't disagree there, but it didn't make for compelling watching for me. I needed a reason to root for him, and I didn't get that in the beginning of the series. And as the show went on, it just never really came about for me.
Yeah, I understand your perspective. And coming from the comic side of things, Yorick is purposefully presented as a bit of a loser.
Which I think comes out in the show.
Yeah. And it's a bit tricky because it takes a little while for his character to develop from being an unsympathetic character to someone who's more likable. So it's unfortunate that the last man in this TV series happens to start out in the form of this unlikable loser. And I think the comic did a better job of making him a bit more appealing. For me personally, Yorick wasn't terrible, but he wasn't necessarily the anchor that I felt the show needed. And he also has a bit of a comedic role, but I thought the comedy played out much better from Allison Mann than it did from Yorick himself.
Yeah, I would agree there.
I thought she was a much better representation of like the kind of sarcasm and wit that would work in this kind of post-apocalyptic scenario, whereas Yorick a lot of the time felt a bit whiny to me. So Lily, what's your thought?
So Yorick isn't my favorite character in the show, but I think his doofusness really works. We all know Yorick. We all know one of him. And so that idea of he's not the chosen one, he's not special, no one knows why it's him, and he is not prepared for this situation, and he's just trying his best. It really makes me think of, oh, what if that one dude I knew in college was the last man? Oh no.
Yeah, but I don't want to watch that. Like, I don't care about that one dude in college who's like Yorick. Why should I care about Yorick?
But that makes... How would you feel if you were in that position? Like, I think he is sympathetic, but not likable.
I think that his feelings are understandable, but again, that doesn't make me care about watching him.
No, that's true. I think he's kind of meant to be this like late 20s, unsuccessful, plotting kind of person, who exactly like this dude in college, probably finished college and then thought, what the hell am I going to do with this degree that I have? It's probably not useful in any capacity. So in that sense, I think he works because he does represent that section of millennial 20-something males who exist today. But he's not necessarily compelling enough on his own. Like, he needs other characters in order to make his situation more relatable or more interesting, which is why Agent 355, who I think has like a much more complex backstory and a more engaging backstory in terms of how she got to be this kind of secret agent type person. And the fact that she's super physically capable, she's mentally capable, and she's tasked with guarding this fucking doofus. And then having Allison Mann to kind of round out this trio makes Yorick a better character. But without them, he's not enough for me.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But his character doesn't take away from the show, I think.
No, that's true.
Unlike Sarah, who was, I think, specifically bothered by him.
Yeah. I mean, was it specifically Yorick? No, it was just all of the characters.
Okay, well, quickly, since we're on these three characters, what are your thoughts on Ampersand? I know he's not really like the most important thing yet in the show, but what were your thoughts of having this character paired with a monkey?
I mean, I like the concept. Again, the execution didn't particularly work for me. I think partially because I didn't enjoy... I mean, how much of this is bound up with me just not liking Yorick, and that transfers to Ampersand? Probably a little bit. I found Yorick's reasoning for getting Ampersand really pretentious, and like the fact that he insists on saying that he rescued Ampersand, which he didn't really rescue Ampersand. like that was just another factor in my disliking him. Maybe something that I could have ignored had I liked the character more.
That was a deviation from the comics, right? I think they were both in a study or something.
Yeah, so ampersand really plays in heavily into why all this stuff happened, and why Yorick survived, but that's far down the line in the series. But Yorick's reasoning for having the monkey are a bit more fleshed out in the comic, whereas unfortunately in the show, like you say, Sarah, it just sounds like some privileged shit deciding he wants a monkey for his escape artist show.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. It wasn't fleshed out enough, whereas the comic does provide a little more context.
I feel like if there had been a second season to watch, or further seasons to watch, these issues that I had with the characters might have been addressed and might have been fleshed out further. But just judging by what we have to go on, I had problems.
No, that's totally fair. And what about the Culper Ring? So the Culper Ring is like a secret organization that Agent 355 works for. And they're touched upon throughout the first season, but it's left in this vague sense of what their reasons are, like why they're orchestrating certain things behind the scenes. So Lily, what were your thoughts on the Culper Ring?
It's definitely, I think, the most compelling part of the show. I love that kind of shady shit, though. I think that's great. So having that big, especially once we get near the end of the season, we start seeing more of them. For most of the show, we really only see them through the eyes of 355 and sort of her memories and what she's willing to share, which is virtually nothing. But we do start to get a little bit more of their machinations in the world around these characters, and it's so fascinating. I want to know more. That's it.
Yeah. I liked it too. It was the kind of thing where we'll get to this later on, sort of like what our hopes for later seasons could be. But I think in terms of like a first season, that was the kind of mystery that worked. Everything else that's going on, that mystery was this little thread that just kept getting plucked along the way and made me more interested in Agent 355 as a character, what her history is like with the organization. Also, the fight scene that she had with another agent was really, really cool and well choreographed.
Mm-hmm.
That was like super tight, really well done. But I think if the show remains just at one season and doesn't continue on, it's just kind of like this unfortunate letdown of this this cool mystery, this cool setup that just kind of flops. Yeah.
That's not fair, though. We don't know what the follow-through could have been.
Exactly.
Or could
exactly. That's just the the unfortunate circumstances.
We might still get another season, if not on FX and somewhere else. I did like the Culper Ring. I thought that was a really compelling story arc, and I would have liked to see more. Like, I think that's the one spot where I was like, yes, I am fully on board.
Secret organizations and mysterious stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, from there we'll go to the Washington Pentagon storyline. We've got Jennifer Brown, who is Yorick's mother, and just because of her position in the government, in the White House, she's the most senior member, senior politician, and I think she was a congresswoman and then got bumped up to president, basically just because of the shattering of the hierarchy. But then we also have Kimberly, who's the daughter of the former president. We have some of the people that are working for the president, and eventually we have Beth, who is Yorick's girlfriend.
Girlfriend, but not fiance.
Yeah, exactly. Girlfriend, but not fiance. So York proposes to her, and then she just flat out says no. Poor York. Poor York.
I mean, can you blame her though? She is way too good for Yorick.
Of course.
That's
she's
not
like,
even her reasoning.
Man, I'm going to Australia. Man. So what was your Sarah, we'll start with you. What was your initial impression of the whole Washington storyline? And then we'll jump to Lily.
Again, I didn't really enjoy it. I'm sorry to be such a downer this episode. I'm just saying I hated everything.
That's okay. You can be wrong on camera.
Fuck this show.
Yeah, it didn't resonate with me. I didn't find Jennifer Brown interesting enough to care about. I definitely didn't like Kimberly. I mean, we're not supposed to really sympathize with her. I felt bad for her because, of course, she went through this really traumatic event and lost her husband and her children. So on that level, I sympathized with her. But she just grated on me, and I didn't find her pleasant watching.
So annoying. Yeah.
I liked Jennifer's assistant, Claire, was it?
Christine?
Was that her name? Christine. Yeah, Christine.
Christine. Yeah.
I liked her. Yeah.
I hated Kimberly, and I loved every second of it.
But you enjoy not liking characters, or you can enjoy a show while you dislike a character, and I'm not quite like that.
I think Kimberly is the perfect example of a character I love to hate. Like, she was set up so well, and she's so well-rounded. She's a real person, and I do feel so bad for her, but at the same time, I hate everything she does, and it's great. And her character arc is just, it's a disaster, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm on the same page because she's, I thought Jennifer was just like, whatever. I'm not interested in her ascendance to the throne or how she attempts to like maintain it. Christine for sure was a more sympathetic character and much more well-rounded and more interesting. And Kimberly, Lily, I'm on the same page as you. It's just like, I fucking hate her. But at the same time, I'm like, I understand your perspective. I understand where you're coming from. Her mother is just like a wreck. And that dynamic between the daughter and the mother was also really well portrayed. In terms of, we've all lost something. But the mother was she was presented to herself by everyone else as crazy, incapable widow. And I thought that all worked out really well, especially towards the end of the season. And yeah, Kimberly, she's annoying as hell, but she worked as like this pestering force within the Pentagon. And she was the only reason that the Pentagon story was better than it could, or better, it was better than it could have been, just for the fact that she was the one who's pulling the strings to kind of like get this Republican leaning coup to happen.
I think that she was an effective foil for the Democratic characters.
Yeah. The only thing is that I want to get into this coup thing and whether either of you think it works. To me, the setup was good, but the execution fell flat, personally.
Well, it got kind of interrupted by the other coup.
Yeah, exactly. It was just kind of like, oh shit, these both things are happening at the same time. And it was like, okay, well, the other one's more interesting. So that whole storyline just didn't feel...
So you thought the insurrectionists were more interesting than the political coup?
I thought the execution of the insurrection was more interesting than the execution of the coup.
Okay.
But the build-up of the coup was more interesting.
Mm-hmm. I also think that the political coup suffered a little bit because Regina just got shot and dies
Yeah,
very suddenly.
She was cool. She was badass.
but it takes away some of the urgency and some of the conflict that
Yeah.
whole situation generated, right? Because now this antagonist is just dead.
Yeah.
It turned it from this really interesting plot line to, oh, this is purely just to move Kimberly's character forward.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because
also to act as a motivation for Hero and Yorick, who only hear through word of mouth that the president's been shot, and so they assume it's their mother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It felt like, okay, cool. It's like this worked only as a
plot device.
As a plot device or a catalyst for Yorick and Hero to just be like, woe was me.
Well, it started as a plot line and turned into a plot device, which was very disappointing.
Yep.
Because while they were setting up this, Jennifer versus Regina situation, I was really wondering, like, how are they going to get through this? What are they going to do? And the answer is nothing.
Exactly.
But I do think it really also sort of catapults Kimberly into the next phase of her character, which is, there's not a polite word for cuckoo banana pants, but
no, I'm gonna just blatantly say it. She wants to be like the sperm messiah, and
she has an Adam and Eve fantasy.
Yes, exactly. And I'm curious, like, what you both think of that, like what the potential is for later seasons for Kimberly's insanity to just get blown out of proportion.
I think it works for her.
Yeah, I have to agree with Lily. I think it works for her. I can understand why she kind of is that way. I found the is it really a sex scene? The sex fantasy that she had about Yorick really awkward.
I think it was supposed to be, though. It was extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah, but again, that doesn't make me any more interested in watching it.
Yeah, all right.
So I think it works for her as a character, but not for me as a watcher.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you, and I think it's kind of like an interesting return to the beginning. I think the very first scene with Kimberly is of her on stage promoting her book about
boy mom.
Sort of
like, yeah, it's like reinventing how masculinity is presented and encouraged and reinforced in children.
Unreinventing it.
Yeah. And then she's the person who essentially gives herself the all important role of like repopulating humanity. So
well, she is one of those people who has only one personality trait. She has built her entire life around being a mother, and so when that was taken away, she really had nothing. She tried to dabble in politics, that didn't work out. So she kind of
basically told her, get out of the room.
Yeah. Well, I loved the look on her face during the insurrection when she realizes that Regina is completely unhinged and incapable of leading, and she put this woman in charge, and just that internal moment of her realizing she done fucked up was excellent. It felt so good because I hated her so much.
Yes, exactly. That's the kind of reaction you want from a character that you hate. It's just like, serves you
yeah
right. Just,
she had her, not her comeuppance, but she realized how much she sucked, at least for a split second, and that felt really good.
All right, and we'll move into Hero, Sam, Nora, and the whole Amazon story. So Sarah, you want to get in there?
Okay, so I really disliked Nora in the beginning. Again, she just grated on me. But I liked seeing her kind of come into her own by the very end of the season, and assume leadership of the Amazons, and kind of start standing up for herself. So I thought that was good and interesting, and a plot line that I would like to see more of in the second season, or in this hypothetical second season. Hero, again, I just didn't vibe with her. I did like Sam. I thought that Sam was an excellent counterpoint to Hero, and I wish that he had stayed with the art teacher. or the
principal. Yeah.
principal. Yeah.
Like, why didn't you go with them north? Why didn't you go? Yeah. And Lily, what about you?
Oh, I loved it. I'm a true crime junkie, and so all that cult stuff, I just eat it up. It's bad. So being able
This show
to
just
watch,
hit on so many notes for you.
so being able to watch the sort of inception and the sort of, we get it mostly in flashbacks, I think, because we join the cult when Hero stumbles upon them, but we do see a series of flashbacks, the creation of it, and sort of that reveal of how manufactured it was, which we don't realize at the beginning. And that I thought was just so fun in the worst way.
I love that part too.
Yeah.
It's like, so Roxanne is this, how would you say?
Homicide detective.
She's a very, yeah, she's very brash,
Straight out of Law and Order.
like, yeah, but like she runs this cult in a way that's like breaking you down through guilt and all that kind of stuff, and then complimenting you as a way of building you up, and also
textbook cult shit.
Exactly. Just like Charles Manson.
Yeah.
Check. But I thought she was a bit like caricaturish for me at the beginning. But like you say, with these flashbacks, everything came together in such a cool way. And I really liked how the origins of the Amazon is revealed. Like you say, it's like piece by piece. All these little clues are kind of coming together, and you realize how full of shit she is. But at the same time, you have the ascendance of Nora as a character. And I thought that was really well done. How they're kind of like contrasting the like the downfall of Roxanne and the revealing of how much she lied, with the ascendance of Nora, realizing how all this is bullshit, realizing how to better, I guess, like actualize herself as a person and as a leader. And then by the end, it's just like, boom, she's like straight into it. Fuck Roxanne, Nora's on top. And that was really cool. And it's also like a nice allusion to the comics, because her true name, how it's revealed, and it's revealed just in the last episode. Her real name is Victoria, and that is the name of the leader of the Amazons in the comic book.
Weren't they a biker gang in the comic? Am I remembering that?
That's a different thing.
Okay.
Yeah. There's like a biker gang in Arizona.
Okay.
And then there's the Amazons as well. But I really like that, and I think that the reveal and fleshing out the origins of the Amazons was well done here, and the way that this whole part of the storyline was, I think, better represented than the comics, because there was more screen time dedicated to what's going on there. But I think Hero, like Yorick, was just wah, like privileged bullshit, not really understanding like her place in the world and how better off she's had it, and just fucking moping and being all self-deprecating and stuff.
I will also say that at the very end, when Hero and Yorick are briefly reunited, and Yorick goes off thinking, oh, my sister's at a cult. But we don't, and my impression is that this is more evident in the comic books, because we actually see Hero shoot Sonia, and we don't see that in the show. It's not her who shoots Sonia. So I thought that was underwhelming, and that could have been strengthened by following the comics more closely, just in that one respect.
Yeah, with Hero in particular.
Yeah,
I think her arc felt a little bit like
she didn't have an
unfulfilled
arc. She's just Hero the whole time.
Exactly. And then the flashbacks with Hero and her family, I think, were also more revealing about how just annoying she is, in the sense that she feels sorry for herself to the point where she just kind of like shits on others.
I mean, I think both Hero and Yorick need therapy.
I think the reason
I can't remember if that's suggested in the show. It's like,
well, that's the
if they both went to therapy.
It doesn't bother me because the show itself criticizes them for those aspects. I think it would bother me a lot more if everyone was okay with them being these doofuses, but they get called out for it repeatedly, and I think that is enough for me to continue engaging with the story.
That's why Sam is a really good foil for Hero, because he's the one who's just straight up calling her out on her bullshit. And I loved him as a character. I was like, I want to see more of him personally. Just to see like where he came from and everything like that. But him and Roxanne and Nora in a few instances as well work to give Hero a bit of a reality check, let's say. And what did you both think of Roxanne in particular, sort of like first impressions of her and the cult, and if that whole like all the other women that are involved in the cult, if any of them felt like they got the time that they deserved? Because towards the end, in the very last episode, there's a big battle, and we'll get into that just a little bit, but it felt like a lot of them just got picked off, and I'm just like, I don't care about you. I don't care about you. You know, it's a lot of very shallow characters.
Yeah, so I think you said earlier that Roxanne felt like a caricature, and I do want to push back on that just a little bit, because I think that was kind of the point of her in the beginning, where she is this caricature because she's basing her whole persona on essentially Law and Order. Like it's all fake. Yeah.
It was a caricature.
Yeah. So I do think that was the point. I think that the other members of the Amazons get a little bit shafted because they're basically just background set pieces. And they don't have a lot of meaningful interaction with any of the characters. I did appreciate that they are a variety of body types, like because there's a bathing scene where you see all of them in the baths, and I feel like you don't see that range of body type on TV very often. So, like, well done there.
I also think that was the least gratuitous nudity I've ever seen on television.
Yeah,
for sure. It was purely practical. There were no weird lingering shots. It was just, they're taking a bath. It's just very straightforward. I thought they handled it well.
As all these naked women are basically like probing Hero for, you know, more information about her, but also just kind of like probing her in the sense that, you know, think about yourself a little bit. Just fucking check yourself, girl.
I think visually it was a really effective contrast to Hero's like closed off, uncomfortable with herself, like that aspect of her character. And here we see all of these women who are just so confident in themselves and their bodies and in where they are. I mean, they're also kind of brainwashed, but
yeah.
But that was very, like you said, it's very well represented through the dialogue and everything, but also physically, as Hero's just kind of like hunched over like this, covering up her body and under the water, whereas all the other women are kind of like standing up and bathing their armpits and stuff like that. So that was I thought that was a cool scene as well, in the sense that it's like good for representing different body types, good for presenting nudity in an understated way,
non-sexual, which I was very impressed by. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I want to know which was your favorite storyline and why, and then we'll dig into how all three kind of converge, or no, two of the storylines converge a little bit towards the end. So we'll start with Sarah. What was your favorite storyline?
I mean, is none of them an answer?
Which one was your least unfavorite?
I think that would have to be Yorick and 355 and Dr. Mann, mostly because I really liked 355 and Dr. Mann, and I wanted to know more about 355. Yorick, I would take him or leave him, preferably leave him. But
yeah. And Lily, what about you?
I think they all shined in different moments. Once we started getting that Amazon ball rolling, I was completely invested in it 100%. But we had to, once we started getting the flashbacks, that was definitely my favorite, and sort of seeing Roxanne's arc, and sort of, oh, and especially once we started seeing her before the event, that just brought everything together so well. But I think if we're looking at it from the show as a whole, it would have to be 355 and Dr. Man and Yorick.
Yeah. Lily, I'm exactly on the same page as you. I really like how the Amazon arc played out. It didn't have me at the beginning, but by the end I was like, this is so damn cool. And then Yorick, 355, Allison Man. I just loved Allison Man and 355 and their interplay. Yorick was just kind of tagging along in the 355 man story. So
But that's what he's doing. He really is basically
exactly
a prop.
I could have done without the implication that 355 has a crush on Yorick, though.
Do they imply that?
Yes,
I think
they
she's
do.
accused of it.
I mean, to me, I read that
that's also something that comes up in the comics.
So. Yeah, to me, I read that as hinting or foreshadowing, because she's accused of it, and she's got a lot of like lingering glances. Multiple characters talk to her about it.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been happier without it.
And then they also have that awesome dance scene with no scrubs, which I loved. So.
But that was fun.
I could have done without that too.
Awesome. I fucking love that song though. I was happy.
I also really loved what is it, Marysville, Ohio, the city, the prisoner city. Yeah. That was probably a really the last half of the season was so good. It just took a lot of setup to get there.
Yeah.
I think the last half was definitely stronger. I do feel like it shouldn't take me 8 episodes to even start marginally enjoying a show.
This was not the show for you. We did
this
you
was
dirty.
Not the show. This was not the show for me. And again, I want to be clear. Like, I think it's a good show, and my comments are more about how I enjoyed it and not about the quality of the show.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally fair. And on the topic of Marysville, so this is a town in Ohio where Yorick, Agent 355, and Allison Mann end up. It's a prison town that ends up getting taken over by the women prisoners. I thought that whole scenario played out super well. I think it was interesting how there was kind of this like push-pull between antagonist ally thing going on with them and the prisoners. It's like, are they keeping us locked up, or are they going to let us go? And then how everything developed was really cool. And then eventually at the very last episode, how the Amazons find out that there's Dick in Marysville, and they just ride in there and want to kill him. How did you find the build up towards that final battle scene, and what did you think of the actual fight itself?
Well, I think it was so perfect because we're also being introduced to these two different groups of survivors kind of at the same time. We have these incarcerated women who have created this really beautiful little self-sufficient town together versus what we think is a group run by a cop, but we find out is that's not actually true. And the sort of play between these two different groups of women and how differently they are coping and dealing with each other as well as the situation at hand. I thought that was just like very, very well done. And the fact that it builds to a confrontation between the two of them, how could it be anything else?
Yeah. No, it's true. It's like the contrast between Community and Cult was very cool, very well done. And I think it was just kind of nice to see like people working together in a post-apocalyptic scenario, because that's something that a lot of books, a lot of movies and stuff in this genre tend to show the darker sides of humanity, as opposed to shining at least a little bit of light onto more positive, community oriented communication and working and living together.
I love that
Sarah?
about this this whole story from the perspective of being a post-apocalyptic narrative, because it does have those optimistic moments. You know, not everyone is just a self-serving douchebag. There are people who are genuinely trying to help other people, and that's really nice.
Yeah. And Sarah, do you have any thoughts?
I thought that it was the scenes with the women, the formerly incarcerated women, were a really effective contrast, because they showed what leadership could be like in these two different groups of surviving women. You know, you have Roxanne, who is leading through fear and ultimately not very effective, and then you see the leadership in Marysville, Ohio, and so that was a good kind of compare and contrast situation.
Yeah, and the fight itself was also representative of this, and I thought that was quite well done. How the Amazons are led through fear, and they're also untrained. It's just a bunch of women with guns who have no idea what they're doing.
They have borderline children, frankly.
Exactly. Yeah. No, straight up, there are children in this group. And then once they're in Marysville, and there's this kind of this hold up kind of situation where guns are pointed and nobody's firing yet. But then Nora realizes how well organized they all are, how they have sharpshooters up on the roofs. They're all coordinating and they all know what they're doing. And then she's just like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And then you also see Roxanne's tantrum when Nora surrenders for the group.
Yeah.
And how, you know, she goes off screaming and kicking at chairs and things.
Like a fucking baby.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
Well, she also expected that they were going to roll in and scare off all the soccer moms. Just completely prideful and not planning at all. Nora tried to come up with a strategy for the attack, and Roxanne said, no, we're just going to go in there guns a-blazing, and obviously we're going to win because we're the Amazons, which obviously doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, that has worked for her in the past.
It's true.
It's not an effective strategy, but...
But the circumstances were not nearly as intense. I think it's like she's basing her strategy on small scale occurrences.
And also she just got lucky in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too.
I also think she doesn't care. If her entire troop was murdered in a blaze of glory, I kind of get the sense she'd be into that. Why else would she have been so upset when Nora surrendered? Like, she was ready. She didn't, she has nothing. And so having this dramatic, it's very cinematic, right? That would be the end of a Law and Order episode, a big shootout and everybody dies. And I really get the sense that she would have been fine with that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then that kind of ties into the Amazons and this generalization of what ancient warfare used to be like, how it's just charging into battle, you know, like 300, and the Spartans would just gloriously die in battle, and that's the greatest honor that life could bestow you, is just get stabbed in the fucking neck and just die on the battlefield. Cool.
Yeah.
So I think that's what she had in her head, whereas Nora comes from this more strategic political background, and she understands well,
and she joins the Amazons because she's trying to survive. That's her goal.
Exactly. Yeah. And on this kind of topic of bipartisan, you know, we've got two groups. How do you feel that we're going to get into a little bit of themes now, how the Republican versus Democrat bipartisan politics game sort of played out in Washington? Do either of you feel like that worked, or that was well represented?
We both take deep breaths and think about it for a minute.
Because both of you live in the States.
Yeah.
So I'm an outsider in this instance.
It felt a little simplistic, I want to say. You know, it would be great if all of the Democrats agreed with each other and were a cohesive team. But that's not super realistic.
Yeah.
So it felt a lot like just trying to set up these two teams to fight rather than a thoughtful look at American. It wasn't a thoughtful look at American politics because it's a post-apocalyptic. There's like 5 people left. You know, that There's no where they keep saying they're going to have an election, but how would that even work? How would you get everyone to vote? That's nonsense.
Everyone's outside the Pentagon burning stuff.
On the other hand, I do think it's realistic that the two parties wouldn't be effective at working together.
Yeah.
Like that felt true to life.
Yeah, it's just from my perspective. I mean, I pay attention to politics, and I do like political science and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just thought it was a bit too basic in the sense of like, you know, we have two groups of kids playing dodgeball on the playground, and they're just hurling a ball at each other every once in a while, and they don't agree, and you know, someone broke the rules and blah blah blah. It just felt a little bit too shallow, and I would have rather it be toned down completely, and not necessarily completely taken out of the show, but toned down in the sense that it took away screen time from other stuff that could have been better fleshed out. So that's
I mean, and it also felt really like a reaction to our recent
Trump.
elections. Yeah. So I think it missed the mark just a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't love politics in my stories.
No, go ahead, Lily. Go ahead.
I don't love politics in my stories. So having this sort of like pretend make-believe politics in the background to watch these characters interact and grow was fine for me. That was the right balance.
Yeah.
It was not realistic, but that's all right.
And I think something else that was a reaction to, you know, the current world, especially, you know, politics in the United States, was the whole representation of gender. We have femininity versus masculinity, and we also have transgender elements. Do either of you want to jump in there and sort of discuss how you thought that was portrayed, if it was good or not?
Well, I just have a comment that I think that they did a really good job in trying to make sure that there was representation in the writer's room. For example, Charlie Jane Anders, who's a trans author, was one of the writers. I think that they had a trans sensitivity reader, or some kind of person whose job it was to go over and look at the trans issues that are brought up. So I thought that in that respect, they did a really good job.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not an authority who can say whether they did good or bad, but I think
That's
we
true
can
too.
definitely say they did it thoughtfully, which I appreciate.
And I think that's the approach that most people from any group appreciate, is come into it with a bit of tact and respect. And
my understanding is also that they did a good job, or at least they did a thoughtful attempt at updating the original comics and being bringing a little bit more nuance to the issue than the kind of black and white, you know, you're either a man or you're not.
Well, there were trans men in the comics. They just weren't very prominent in the story, if I remember.
Yeah, but also, because Sam, the transgender character, he's entirely made up. He wasn't in the comic originally. There were no prominent characters, you know, that were like outwardly trans in the comic. But I think what the show did better than the comic did was infusing bits of world building and bits of information into dialogue. So I think there's one throwaway line that Allison Mann has where she's talking to Yorick in the university in Boston, and she just tosses out there, "What do you think? Do you think it was? Do you think it was just men that died?"
Yeah, she's talking about
there are some women who have Y chromosomes, even though they're genetically and gender-wise a female.
Yeah, gender's not really a binary.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
I appreciated that speech from her.
Yeah. I was going to say that speech comes pretty early on too, and I'm glad they worked that in so early. Just Dr. Mann schooling Yorick on like it's not a yes or no situation, right? It's a lot more complicated than that, and I'm really glad that they found a way to work that into the show.
Even and I mean it works. It's just Yeah, but it's just a line of dialogue that didn't feel forced and it felt natural for the context. And it's just like, listen, idiot, stupid Yorick. It's not just like men, women, that's it,
Mm-hmm.
And it also gets even more complicated when it comes to animals too, which I thought was the kind of thing that just got infused into the show in a really nice way.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sam himself, he was one of my favorite characters, and I thought he was very well portrayed. And the way that I'm curious what you both think, the way that he kind of conflicted with the Amazons, because he physically looks like a man, but they all know that he's transgender. So there was kind of this like push and pull of him feeling uncomfortable and not welcome. So what did you two think about that?
Well, I think he hits the nail on the head where he says, either it's okay that I'm here because I'm not really a man, which is a quotation, right? Or it's not okay that I'm here because I'm a man and they hate all men. So which is it?
Yeah.
And I think right, like that's the situation in a nutshell. There is no way for him to coexist with the Amazons comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think that he's underutilized as a character.
Well, that's because he's the only likable one.
Basically, I would have liked to see more of him. Yeah, I've already said all of that. But
that was just the showrunners knowing, like, oh, Sarah's gonna hate the characters, so the one that she does like, we're just gonna lessen his screen time.
Yep.
Well, I'm curious also what you both think of we've talked about it a little bit, touched on it here and there, about the portrayal of what it's like to be in a post-apocalyptic world, whether it's from like an anxiety level, moral and ethical approaches to situations. Do either of you have any parts of the show that really stood out to you as like good or bad in that regard?
I loved how varied it was.
Mm-hmm.
We saw how different people reacted to this scenario, and it wasn't always how you would expect those specific people to react. We saw some people who went full on, road warrior, and then some people who thought, we'll just, go to the pub and wait for this all to blow over, and everything in between, right? And then the nice people and the mean people, and it really hit a lot of the points, I think.
Yeah, I did like how it wasn't uniformly bleak. Like you did get pockets where people are cooperating with one another. You did get some of that. It's not just everyone's out for themselves.
Humanities doesn't suck. Too much.
That said, I still found it entirely unappealing. I don't want to be in a situation like that.
Well, yeah. For a lot of reasons. Oh, I did want to bring up, I've been trying to get everyone to watch this show. Sorry, Sarah. But whenever I explain the concept, whenever I explain the concept to someone, the very first thing they say, every time, no joke, oh, with all the men gone, so it's just a utopia now, right? No. That's not the point at all. The point is women are, like, there's no difference between women and men. We all react different ways. And anyway. But then the next thing they say is, oh, so everyone's trying to sleep with Yorick then, right? Also, no. They're too Hollywood. Gosh.
It's amazing
too
how
many
that
generalizations.
Very first impression of just the show's overarching concept is so ripe for misunderstanding.
Yep. Actually, that's a very good point to bring up, because I think, perhaps a reason that the show got canceled is because of that. There are a lot of people that potentially could have approached it from, why the hell would I want to watch this woke shit? Why would I want to watch a show entirely cast with women, except for one person? So, although I don't know if the character of Sam is actually portrayed by a man or a transgender.
I think Sam is actually portrayed by a trans actor.
Yeah, I think so. So it's just a bit of an unfortunate situation where there is, like you say, a lot of potential for misunderstanding. It's ripe for that. And I think the show probably lost a lot of potential viewership just based on the fact that some people coming at from one angle not liking it for a certain reason, other people coming at it from another angle, not liking it for a certain reason. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of them miss out on the nuance that the show brings, because I think the concept is very simplistic, and it's just kind of this like dichotomy of like men, women, men die. What happens?
Women be like.
But,
but one of the things I think the show
humans are so complex.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, humans are so complex, and there's so much nuance in humans. So of course, in a post-apocalyptic scenario, just with women, there would be a lot of complexity and nuance there too. And it's just unfortunate that the concept doesn't really sell the show broadly, I guess.
But that's the whole point of the show, is that all of these women are going through the same stages that you see in any post-apocalyptic story. You have the road warriors, you have the survivalists, the point is that people are people no matter what. And I think that's really beautiful and well done. It's also not a man-hating show. Like, so many of the characters are heartbroken that their loved ones are dead, and it's not men are evil at any point, except for the Amazons.
Unless you're an Amazon.
But they're being criticized for that thought. and I think it's so interesting that people assume, well, obviously they assume the simple answer when it's actually very complex and thoughtful.
Yeah, but that's just the unfortunate thing, is like you have to watch the show in order to understand that nuance.
Yeah.
And if you judge it from the outset just based on the principal concept, then I think a lot of people could be turned off by that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of little things that someone, like you, Sarah, I don't like post-apocalyptic stuff. Bye. Someone who's, I don't want to see a show just with women. Bye. A lot of things that unfortunately could turn people off and miss out on what the show does have to offer. Just getting into a little bit more of like the nitty-gritty stuff, I'm curious what you both think of. I wanted to talk about dialogue, because I think that's something that's a bit inconsistent throughout the show. And then also other things like the cinematography or the music or the atmosphere of the show, if there's anything that you want to touch on.
I didn't notice any particular issues with the dialogue. Again, maybe because I was too busy hating the characters who were saying it. I did like the cinematography, and I also really liked the opening clip. Like, I thought that was really well done and a good representation of what the show is going to be like.
Yeah, I think the opening title.
Yeah.
Or that, but also I think like the opening shot where Yorick is in the streets of New York, and then it zooms out, and it's a top-down view of 3 streets in New York that somehow come together in a Y. I don't know if that actually exists, but it was really cool. Lily, is there anything that you want to bring up in terms of, the technical stuff or the atmosphere, dialogue, all that kind of thing?
Well, I did notice at the beginning, in the first episode, maybe, or just the beginning itself, a lot of the shots were blurred out in strips at the top and bottom. Or not blurred out, but my husband gave me a fancy word for the name of that thing. But I noticed that they used it a lot, and I didn't love it. Apparently it's a thing for some reason. All of the filmographers are going to get mad at me.
I think it's like a depth of field thing where it kind of like out of focus around the edges.
It wasn't the edges, though. It was just the top and bottom. Like, the sides were... Anyway, I just noticed because everyone's feet were fuzzy. I was like, what are you doing? They stopped doing it as much, but I did notice that. And usually if I notice cinematography, it's a bad sign. But I do think, except the part that I noticed at the end that was very good, there was a conversation between Yorick and Sonia that was shot, I think, in a mirror reflecting them, and it was just very beautiful and cool.
I think I brought up dialogue earlier. It's mostly the dialogue in Washington that didn't click for me. A lot of it was a bit clunky. I don't think Jennifer, like that, no offense to the actress for Jennifer Brown, but I don't necessarily think she was like the most compelling, and she delivered some lines that were just like, it was a bit, you know,
Her
it
dialogue
was a
was
bit
pretty on the
flat.
nose. Like, I'm going to say what I feel and what I think right now.
Yeah,
Which, if she's a skilled politician, you'd think she'd know better.
exactly,
Especially
exactly.
when she's trying to cover up
It just,
Yorick. It's like, what are you doing? You're so
yeah,
obvious
it
right
was
now.
exactly. It was just unconvincing to me that she was a congresswoman,
Mhm.
that she had persuaded people with her voice, because she felt so meh as a leader. And it was mostly the Washington scenes that just the dialogue didn't click for me a lot of the time. Um, Mostly around Jennifer's character. I thought like Virginia was fucking awesome. She was just like very uh blunt and crude in the way that she delivered her dialogue and everything like that. Christina too was good. She felt, just the right amount of emotional. But yeah, just like I think Jennifer didn't work for me as a character.
Politicians are better liars than that.
Exactly. She felt like a principal, like lecturing school children
Yeah.
more than anything, you know?
And yeah, and just the way she tries to cover up the fact that Yorick is still alive was just so ham-fisted and over the top
Yeah.
and transparent. It was like, what are you? I know you've done this before. Do better.
Another thing that I really enjoyed, the atmosphere. I thought this is kind of in combination with the music. I thought the score was really well done, and the way that they used music to kind of set the tone for different scenes worked really well. Um, there was a lot of really moody vibes coming from the music that amplified what was on screen, and I thought that was well done. There's one scene, I think it was in episode 6, where there's a bunch of women who are it's it's kind of like a memorial type thing, but they were all with candle. No, it was a vigil. That's the word that I was looking for. It was a vigil where they had a choir that was singing "Karma Police" by Radiohead, and
Oh, that
that
was
scene
good.
was
Yeah.
beautifully shot and beautifully presented, and it was like chilling and emotional and mesmerizing at the same time. So I very happy with how the music and the cinematography worked together throughout the show. I thought that was well done.
It definitely gave me chills at that point, and I remember noticing it a couple other times, but I don't remember what scene in particular it was. But I definitely had like emotional reactions because of, like you said, just the imagery and the music all coming together.
Yeah. And just a quick aside before we get into final impressions. Just some changes that were made for the show, some things that were omitted. There's a lot of supernatural elements. Lily, since you've read the initial run of the comics, there's Agent 355 in the beginning of the comic series. She's in Jordan, and she's on a mission from the Culper Ring, seeking out this ancient amulet. Um, and the prophecy is basically like that: if this amulet leaves Jordan, terrible things will happen. It's worse than the Trojan War and all this kind of stuff. Devastation will occur. So it's kind of this like weird supernatural red herring for this series as a reason for why the apocalypse might have happened. But then there's also another storyline that I actually really liked throughout the comics about this Israeli military group. I wrote down the name because I couldn't remember the name of the character, but it's Colonel Yedida Alter Selon. So she's an Israeli colonel, and basically she's tasked by the Israeli government to find Yorick, so that they can figure out a cure and all that kind of stuff, and use him for their own purposes. But I thought this was like, in the context of the comic, it worked as um, a good glimpse outside of America. And that's one of my main criticisms with the show, is it's very America centric, and part of me is just thinking like, what's going on elsewhere in the world? That happens later in the comic series, of course, but I don't know how they're going to introduce this stuff. They've never even hinted at much of it other than the beginning of the show where Virginia was at a conference or something in Tel Aviv. But,
and I think Regina was in a different country.
Oh, sorry. I keep saying Virginia, but I meant Regina.
Okay.
Yeah. So Regina was in Israel in Tel Aviv, and then they thought she was dead, but then she survived and came back to the United States. So
I agree. It would be nice to see how this whole thing played out in other places, even if it was just a montage at the beginning, acknowledging that there's a globe.
We get a statement about what's going on in Russia, where they said that the male Russian politicians survived, and then the populace stormed the Capitol and found that was actually a lie and propaganda.
Yeah, but that to me felt like America-centric propaganda. Russia.
I think it would have been a more effective glimpse outside of the U.S. if it had been not Russia. I agree.
Like a montage, like you say, Lily, that would have been interesting to sort of give like a glimpse of. I think it would have worked in the first episode when they had the event happen and all the men died, to just give like this broad, like, this is what the aftermath looks like everywhere. Mm-hmm. Would have been amazing. But
yeah.
Oh well. Well, we'll get into some final impressions about the show.
Well, one other change
if you
they
have anything
made
to say
was Beth. Her character is very different. I think it worked very well. But in the comic book, she is already in Australia, I believe.
Yep.
Whereas in the show, she's still in the United States, and she actually ends up leading the insurrectionists against the Pentagon. So it was a huge change. I liked it. It gave her something to do. Maybe she does something later in the books, but
because in the comics, she's just like a distant goal for a lot of the time for Yorick. And she doesn't flesh out much as a character. But I think it was cool in the TV series that they gave her more to do, but at the same time put her in conflict with people that she knew.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
I think this makes her feel more like a person and less like just a love interest.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Exactly. She has her own goals. She has her own goals and motivations. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll do some final impressions, and then obviously the show has been canceled, unfortunately.
Adrian, you broke my heart when you dropped that on me right before recording. I didn't
Better
know.
Before than right now. Better before than right now. I didn't cancel it.
I'm holding you personally responsible.
Oh man. Well, first of all, we'll get into the cancellation, and then we'll do final impressions and hopes for a possible second season. So, what are your thoughts on the cancellation? And then we'll go quickly between both of you, and then we'll jump into final impressions. So, go for it.
I mean, I think it's a shame that it got canceled. And like, I believe the showrunner has said that she had a 5-season plan in place, and she feels really passionate about the show. So it's unfortunate that she's not going to be able to tell that story. And some of these plot lines really don't wrap up at all, and we're left on a cliffhanger. And on that level, I think it's a shame as well. Not that I probably would have watched a second season, just because this, like I said, this wasn't the show for me. But I still think that it was a good show and deserves to have that chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I loved the show, and I don't think anyone who watches it could say that it's bad or poorly done, but it's so easily misinterpreted, like you were saying, with the concept. And you do have to sort of hang in there for a few more episodes than I would like.
A long time.
Before it really starts getting good, which I think means the second season would be phenomenal. But that's maybe too much setup. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it was, I think, episode 6 where things really clicked for me. The first episode was awesome, and then the next 3 to 4 episodes lagged. And there was just a lot of build up, a lot of world building, putting characters on different parts of the chessboard kind of thing. So yeah, it's just a bummer, but I would like to see it get a second season. I think just because I've read all the comics and I know what happens down the line, there are some storylines that are so cool. There's a fucking ninja and it's like awesome. And I think if it could get 5 full seasons from another network, then the potential for the show to just amp up really quickly. There's so much cool stuff that could be waiting there. You know, I'm kind of thinking of it in the sense of The Witcher, where the first season was based on short story collections, and you know, there was a lot of setup, a lot of stuff that had to be introduced. The character of Geralt doesn't get fleshed out all that well, but now with the second season, it's like, oh, cool. Everybody's in the same place. Everybody's converged. And now we have a more cohesive storyline that doesn't jump over different timelines and things like that.
Am I the only person in the world who liked that? Maybe.
I liked it.
I loved it.
I didn't get what was happening initially. It took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out that they were doing this time skip
Foltest was
stuff.
the key. King Foltest was the key. Anyway.
I mean, I watched it with my wife and she's just like, what's going on? She really enjoyed it. But for me, it's like, I love the short story collections, and I've read the whole series. So I was like, the whole time we watched that show, I was like, this is happening then. This is happening then.
Yeah.
He's younger. Now he's older. And she's just like, oh my God. Yeah. But I think for Y: The Last Man, there's just a lot of good world building and good character development that has been established, that I think it would be a shame for a second season.
This felt like a very setup season, right?
Yeah.
Where you need that second season and the following seasons to expand on that and actually dig into the characters and what's going on.
Yeah. And I mean, like you say, not everything, but a lot of the storylines get left on a cliffhanger. And I think as a self-contained season, it doesn't work at all. And it needs, like you say, it needs more time, more continuation in order to give these storylines the satisfactory ending that they deserve. Because it's like, you know, with Yorick, Agent 355, and Allison Mann, they have a farther goal down the line, but where things leave off, it's like, drive off into the sunset. You know? And then with the Amazons, I think that ends up a little bit more tightly, where Nora is in the leadership position, but still it's kind of like, where does it go from there? You know, there's just a lot left hanging that I think it would really benefit from some kind of feature at another network or Netflix.
Yeah, there's no conclusion to it, right?
No.
Like, none of the characters have a conclusion.
If you look at it purely from Nora's perspective, if Nora was the main character, then you have a full arc.
Exactly. Well, this episode has to come to a conclusion. What are some closing thoughts that either of you have? We'll go with Sarah first.
If you like post-apocalyptic fiction or television, please don't let me put you off from this show. Give it a shot. I hated it, but that's just my personal opinion. I'm sorry for being so negative on this episode.
It's fine. You're the foil. You're the Sam to our hero.
I'll take it. That's very kind of you to say, Adrian.
And Lily, what about you?
I loved it. So, like I said, my husband was a big fan of the comics, and something he complained about constantly is a very small thing, but apparently the comics start with a chart of like what percentage of different professions are held by men versus women. And he kept waiting for that in the show. That doesn't have anything to do with the show as a whole, but he was really excited for that, and it never happened. But I think it's an interesting framing device.
Yeah, I think they could have implemented that in some way where it was like contextual within a scene, you know? Fuck off Russia information. Just like put like something about like
I want employment statistics.
Exactly. I don't care about Russian oligarchs. I want to hear about the jobs in the United States.
I think that chart would have done really well in the title sequence. Like just have that as one of the graphics.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that too. I think from my perspective, I like the show. I think it's worth giving a shot. Like Sarah says, if you're into the post-apocalyptic genre, I think this is a nice twist on the usual nuclear bomb or plague, or I guess it is a plague. Shit.
But it's so specific that it's definitely different.
Exactly. Yeah. Or zombies or whatever. I think this is at least the kind of post-apocalyptic scenario that gives a lot more breadth in terms of moral complexity, positivity versus more pessimistic or survivalist approaches. So for me, I think this show is good. It could be great in later seasons, but it's worth watching. It's only 10 episodes, and I think the first episode is the one that's going to hook people. If you don't get hooked on the first episode, you're not going to continue until the end because it drags a little bit after that. But the last 4 episodes are phenomenal, really, really good. So yeah, thank you both for joining me for this conversation. Sarah, I'm so happy you just shit on Why the Last Man. Lily, I'm glad you loved it. If you could both tell viewers, listeners where they can find you, social media, also about your podcast, let it rip.
If you want to hear us argue more, because that's kind of all we do on the podcast.
that is the gist of the podcast.
You can find us at Fiction Fans on all of the major streaming places. We got your Spotify, we got your Apple Podcasts.
If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us at Fiction Fans Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And we're also, if you want to email us, we're also fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
I let Sarah do that part because she's the one who does Twitter.
I got the email right this time, though, right, Lily?
I think so.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, listeners, viewers, you can look forward to seeing Sarah and Lily on the podcast in the future. But for today, thank you both for being here. I'm really glad we got to talk about this show.
Thanks so much for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you. This was wonderful. I was delighted to talk about Why the Last Man with you both.
I like having someone to gang up on Sarah with.
Virtual high five.
Yeah.